Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Lonnie with Borderline. We're on video number 2 in our series, our 3-part series about the PR Sting curbing machine from Borderline. Video number 1, we went through all the components and parts of the machine and explained what they are and what they do. This particular video we're going to go through and help those guys that are just starting or looking at starting curbing, or some inexperienced guys that are looking for some tips and tricks and ways to operate the machine that they may have not seen before, just because they haven't had the correct training or just haven't been instructed to to run the machine properly. Now, the PR Sting and a lot of machines are originally designed to go clockwise around a house or clockwise around a tree. Okay, so what that means is essentially that the house would be over here, and I'd be starting on this side of the house, and I would be going around the house clockwise and ending back at this point. Okay, and the reason for that is, if you look at the undercarriage right here, the undercarriage is offset to the left. So the left side of the actual curb is going to be in line with the left side of the frame of the machine. And the way they originally thought was, if you run that paint line right there, then you can run the paint line right on the edge of your machine, and you can easily see it. So everything that I'm going to show you here and everything on the videos that we do on site when we curb is based on going clockwise around a house. Now, there's hundreds of guys out there that run not only these machines but other machines in the opposite direction. That's totally fine. You can go both directions with this. You just change the mold around and go the opposite direction. And if that's the way those guys learned how to do it, or it's the way that they feel comfortable doing it, it's fantastic. Some of the best guys out there, run their machine the opposite way. I don't know how to do that, honestly. So the only thing I can really show you is what I've been trained and how I do it for 17 years, and is to go in this direction. And kind of explain why I do certain things and why we go that direction and what makes it easier for me. So we're just going to go ahead and get started here with the little simple things at the beginning when you start a job, or what you're going to look for and what you're going to do, and just keep going from there, and hopefully this helps you. Okay, number one thing we're going to do, obviously we got the machine out of the trailer, it's on site. Let's say this is our sidewalk. We're going to begin curbing right at the sidewalk, and we're going to start going in that direction. Okay, this is the mold that we're going to use. This is a slant style curb. I can tell you right now, this is 99% of all the curb that we do with Valley Borders. This is the one that I've kind of trained all my landscapers to use. It's easy to trowel, easy to work with, a lot easier than some of the other ones. What we're going to do, obviously, to begin with, we need to get these tires off and get that on the ground. And what I'll do is I'm just going to go ahead and put those back on, so the guys don't have to come back and grab those tires when we're ready to move. Now, the new molds that we make here in the last few years are different than the old ones. We don't have to put holes in here. These don't get bolted up, okay? Like a long time ago, people would bolt them up. Honestly, in all the years that we've been curbing, even with the holes in there, we never bolted them up. The weight of the machine and the direction the machine is going will hold this mold in, okay? And simply all you do, lift it up and put it down. You're ready to go. You don't need to do anything. Now, after about 5 or 10 feet of you moving in that direction and that concrete being packed in there, if you lift up the machine, 9 times out of 10 the mold stays in by itself. It doesn't fall out. So for those guys worried about it falling out all the time and all, it doesn't do that. So what we're going to do, and obviously we're going to go around the house in this direction, is if my guy came up with the pile driver, the pile driver would be right here with the wheelbarrow. Okay, so he's going to shovel everything in to the hopper in this direction. All right, what I'm going to ask him to do, now this is the sidewalk. Typically we have them at the start of every run, we have them put their foot in front of the chute, in front of the undercarriage. What that is going to create a wall so that the first foot of that can be compacted, and as it starts moving about a foot or so, there's enough concrete in the ground that you can remove your foot and it won't slide. If you just let it go and it starts coming out, it'll just start sliding until there's enough on the ground to where the machine starts going backwards. It's just a big mess for the guys that are doing the finishing. So first foot or so, you have them do that, and then the machine will go a little bit. What we suggest, and again to make it easier finishing, is after he starts throwing the concrete in the hopper and machine is pushing, after about 4 or 5 strokes you can start to feel it pack. What you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and put your feet in the back of the tires, and you're going to go ahead and lift the machine a little bit so you can lift the front. And if you lift the front, you can get a little bit more concrete come out out here and raise it just a little bit. So as they go, whoever's finishing right here doesn't need to grab a handful of concrete and add it there, because by you doing a little wheelie right there, you've added that concrete for him, and it makes it easier for him to finish. So just to begin, that's the easiest way to, kind of get going on your line. Now you're looking at the front of the machine, and obviously the mold is inside the undercarriage, okay, and that's where we want it. If we're going in a clockwise direction, around a house, around a tree, or doing an island, and we're going to do it clockwise, and that's the way I'm going to show you, the high side of the curb, okay, which is the back side of the curb, is going to be on the left side of the machine, okay? Essentially, all this right here, when it's done, is going to be rock or mulch or whatever kind of filler they're putting in here next to the house. Your grass is over here, okay, so if that makes sense. If we put this mold the opposite direction, the curb would be facing the wrong way, okay? But if guys are going counterclockwise, so they're going to go in that direction, this mold would have to be turned around to make sure that the high side is facing towards the house, okay? So when we talk about inside curves and outside curves, which we will in a little while, we're always talking about the left side of the machine is going to have the high side of the curb, okay? So so you kind of understand that. Again, those guys that may run their machines in the opposite direction, some of these things here that I'm explaining are going to be opposite for you, and wouldn't make much sense on the way that you operate a machine. Again, these are for those guys that may be starting or a little bit inexperienced. We're just showing them some techniques that they can get started and get going. But this is the way my mold is in there 99.9% of the time, okay? So high side is to the left, because my line essentially is going to go up the left side of the frame of the machine. I'd have a paint line going right here, and so I can follow that. All right, so as you come up to the back side of the machine and you're ready to go ahead and start your machine, what you're essentially going to be looking for, and I've had a lot of guys, just ask, what are you looking for as far as how low the machine should be, how to start your line, where to put that machine as you're going around the corners and curves and things like that. It's really based on, for me, it's based on the left side of the machine, okay? But for as far as raising your machine to make sure it's not scraping the ground, on this, on the PR Sting, on our undercarriage, and I'll show you that in a little bit, we refer to those as skids, okay? These do a couple different things. Obviously, being rounded, it's able to slide across the ground a little bit easier, and if you do accidentally get a little bit lower, it doesn't affect the running of the machine. If this is running on the ground, it'll actually sometimes stop the machine, but your concrete's still coming out the front. So you got to make sure that what I look for, what I tell people, try to make sure you can at least fit a finger underneath, maybe a ½ inch off the ground, just to make sure that that skid is not running on the ground, which should really cause you problems later. These skids right here are going to prevent a lot of slag from coming out the side, so you have a lot less waste. But when I'm looking down the side of the machine, all I'll be doing is, before I start, I'm going to look down the side of the machine and make sure that skid's off the ground. If my machine is level, I'm going to know that my other skid on the other side of that undercarriage is going to be off the ground also. And a good way to see if it's too low on that side is if you have more slag or less slag on the right side than you do on the left. Now on this machine, we don't put a bubble level on here. All right, and there's a particular reason for that. And all the other ones have it. If you're staring at a bubble, okay, which in a way to me doesn't make a lot of sense, because your machine is constantly pumping, constantly moving. That bubble's it's never ever in the middle anyway, it's always moving. If you're staring at the bubble, you're not seeing anything else. It's texting and driving. It's exactly what it is. Because if you're just constantly looking down at this, you don't know that you're too low on that side. You don't know that you're high. You don't know that you're not getting enough pressure on the machine, so you're going to have cracking or so on. So your knowledge and experience with that machine is going to be more beneficial than that bubble, because once you run the machine for a little while, you're going to know if it's level or not by how it feels on your hand, how it feels on your, if you have to put your body next to it and so on. It's going to tell you if it's level or not. You can't stare at a bubble. So that's one of those things we don't put on there. We've had guys that have had other machines that really like that, and so they add a bubble, and that's totally fine. If you're new and you're buying equipment, you've never run a machine before, we're not going to put a bubble on there for you, because we want you to, the machine is going to be able to tell you everything that you're going to need to know, okay, by the way it acts, by the way it sounds, by the way it feels. So we feel it's very, very important that you understand your machine and what it's telling you. But just to start, we want to make sure that's, you know, at least a ½ inch off the ground. That way we know we're not dragging. Here's an undercarriage right here, and you can see the skids on there. They don't go all the way across, but you can see how they're curved, and they go from here. As the plunger is moving back and forth, it's obviously not going to allow some of that excess to go onto the outsides. It's a very simple concept, and there's a lot less cleaning involved after the fact. One thing about it, though, is when you know, we'll talk about this in the maintenance video, you got to make sure that these are clean after every job, because concrete will get stuck back here, and if you don't clean it, that you can, you know, run into issues later. Now, as far as running the machine, and whoever the operator is, what I suggest on your crew is you kind of keep everybody the same. So if one person is pretty confident with the curb machine, typically that's the owner of the company, you stay with that. That guy needs to really get experience on that machine. Maybe another guy is the finisher and so on, but really stick with that. Some guys are really good mixers, but they can't really trowel that well, and vice versa. So once you get a guy that can really run the machine, that feels pretty confident, stick with that. Try not to switch it out too much, okay? Now, the way I teach this is your left hand is going to be on your steering handle, and it's not coming off, okay? Your right hand, because if you're going in this direction, odds are you're going to be right-handed, all right? Your right hand is going to be the one where you're going to raise and lower this, all right? There are guys that will run curb, and the right hand, they'll do this one, and then they'll take their hand off the steering wheel and do this one. Nobody's steering, okay? You're taking your hand off there, and you're not getting correct pressure on the machine. So always try to keep your left hand on the steering handle if possible. 99.9% of the time it's going to be there. You know, sometimes you got to do some things, and you know, it's not a for sure thing that's there all the time. But as a general rule, keep that there. We always talk about pressure and back pressure on a machine. Okay, now the Borderline PR Sting is about 205 pounds, which puts it kind of middle of the road when it comes to other manufacturers' machines. The blue machines out there are a lot heavier. Some of the other ones are a lot lighter. And you know, there's pros and cons to all that, which we've got into with another video. No matter where you are, you're going to want to make sure you have back pressure on the machine. Typically the machine's not heavy enough by itself to make sure that concrete is compact. So what you're going to do is give a little bit of pressure on the backside to make sure everything is packed in the front, and you're going to have less issues with cracking. Your hand on the steering handle is 1 point of pressure. We tell everybody that we would like you to have 2 points of pressure all the time on the machine, okay? So if I'm on level ground and I'm just going around a curve like this, my hand right here is a point of pressure, because I can push against the handle and actually put pressure on the machine to make sure I'm compact. So that's always 1 point of pressure. Your other hand can ride here. If you got a nice level surface and you don't got to adjust too much, your other hand is here. So now you got 2 points of pressure, always, okay? Now if you're going down an incline, what I do, okay, is I come to this side of the machine, my leg and my hip is now another point of pressure, but my right hand is free, so I can go ahead and turn and raise and lower, okay? If you can't put your body against there and you have to pull your hand off here to raise and lower, then what you need to do is put twice the amount of pressure on your handle to compensate for this hand coming off. Now if you're on level ground, you might not need to do that. But if you're going down a little bit of incline, the machine wants to go downhill, it's gravity. And you gotta make sure that you're getting compaction. You need to be looking at that curb to make sure that there's no separation. Because if it comes out and you see little cracks forming, that means you can put a little bit more pressure on there to close those cracks. If there's a really wide cracks, you might have issue with cracking down the road in a few days or in a month where it's not tight enough right there and it'll crack. So there's things to look for on that end. If you're getting too much back pressure, you'll have ripples in the curb. And it'll be like little lines in the curb, and that tells you that you're getting really good pressure. But if it's too much, you can blow the curb out and you gotta fix it by hand. If there's not enough, you're gonna have separations and you might have cracks. So that's the reason why we tell people, if you're staring at a bubble, you can't see any of those things that are happening. You have to have the level correct, you have to have the compression correct, you gotta be able to see your line, you gotta be able to see where you've been to make sure your line flows. And if you're staring at a bubble, you're not gonna be, you're not gonna pay attention to those things as much as you should. Okay, I'm gonna do a little, I have a hose on the ground here, and it's gonna, be my line. Let's say I painted a, a paint line, and I'm going around a curve like that, okay? If you're running the curb machine in this direction, which would be clockwise around the house, and the high side is right there on the left side next to the line, next to the house, what we would call that kind of curve would be an inside curve. Best way I can explain this is if you're doing a tree ring, it's pretty simple. There you're going clockwise around a tree ring. The high side of the curb needs to be on the inside of the actual curve itself to hold that mulch back or rock back that's in that tree ring. Okay, so this would be considered an inside curve. Okay, an outside curve would go the opposite direction. An outside curve, if you're going in this direction, is harder to do because the high side is now on the outside of the actual curve, and it's harder to put pressure down that side of the curb machine to make sure that's compact. So doing a tree ring, it's easier to get compaction, and you have less cracking on a tree ring than if you were going to do one going the opposite, because you're not going to get as good compaction on the high side of the curb, and that's where you need it. So this would be considered an inside curve, and I'll kind of show you where I put my body and where I direct pressure to make sure that I have everything compact. Let's see if I can explain this a little bit better to you as you're going around, curves, inside and outside curves, with the trowel, okay? And just pretend this is the front of the machine. Now as the concrete gets pushed out the front, if you're actually going around an inside curve like this, the high side of the curb is pinching. So the compaction on this side of the curb going this direction is really good because that's the direction that the curve is. So typically you have good compaction on this side, but you have less compaction over here because of where the pinch point is. The pinch point's over here, so there's gonna be a little bit more separation on the back side. If you're going around an outside curve like this, in this direction, your pinch point is now here, okay? It's pinching right there, and you're gonna have less compaction on the high side. Now, if this isn't compacted and you have a decent crack right here, that can easily crack all the way down to the front side of the curb. So going in that direction, outside curve, with a machine like this in that direction it's a little bit more difficult to get this side packed, and I'll kind of show you where I put my body to direct pressure to make sure I got good compaction. Okay, so if I'm taking the machine around this curve, okay, again, the high side of the curb, which is that slant style curve right here, is pinching. So I got really good compaction on that high side. It's the side over here that's kind of separating a little bit, so I got to make sure I have more compaction on this side of the machine than that side. Now, a lot of guys that run machines for a long time, may not do the same things I do. It's just a different way of kind of showing you on how things kind of actually work with pinch points and things like that. You need to kind of just take everything that you're watching here and try it, see if you like it, see if it works for you. Great. If not, just come familiar with the machine and you can kind of figure it out. But if I'm going in this direction, I'm going to put my body on this side of the machine and put my hip into this, especially if it's a tighter curve. and I can direct pressure essentially down the right side of the machine. I'm not worried about the left side because I got a pinch point there, remember, I'm going on an inside curve. So I'm just gonna basically put my hip into this and I can tell if I'm getting good compaction. I still got my right hand free so I can do all the leveling that I need. And now that I'm open like this, I can see my line. I can see where I've been and I can see where I'm going. So I can make sure that that line flows. Sometimes if you're like this all the time, you don't really see what's, where your lines are and you don't see what's in back of you. So you really got to make sure that you're open in this sense, okay? So if I just put my hip into this, I can usually get the bottom part to close. Now a lot of these things are going to be your compression and how you're going to do with your, your curb and cracking and things like that. It's going to depend on your mix and what you're using for sand and what you're using for chemicals. We're gonna do a really good couple videos on mixing and things like that that I never really got to do last year. So that's really going to be a big part of how your curb comes out of the machine. If it's too dry, too much pressure can blow it out. If it's too wet, there's all sorts of things with that. But as far as adjusting your body to where you need to go, I still got my point of pressure here. I still got my point of pressure here, so I got 2 points of pressure, and that's kind of what we're looking for to make sure that you got a nice compact curve. Now basically I've just moved the hose, okay? I went from an inside curve to an outside curve. Now you're going to have issues with compaction on the high side of the curve, which would be down this side of the frame. All right, so for me, I would go ahead and switch my body position to make sure I get compaction on the high side. I'm not worried about the low side because that's where our pinch point is. Okay, so if you really think about it, it makes sense. Now we don't have that pinch point on this side. We have the pinch point on this side of the curve because we're going in this direction. So what I'm going to do with this curve, again, outside curve, if I'm going clockwise around the house, instead of having my body on this side, I'm not worried about compaction on the bottom. The machine is doing that for me essentially. I'm worried about compaction on the high side. So I'm going to shift my body from that side of the machine and I'm going to put my body behind the handle. Now again, 2 points of pressure if possible. My hand is always 1 point of pressure. I can push on the handle and that will compact the curb. But essentially I like to put the handle right into my hip like this. Now I got 2 points of pressure, my body and my hand. And I got my right hand free so I can do everything here, raise and lower. But now I'm directing pressure right down the left side of the frame, right to the high side of the curb, and I can get that to compact. Okay, now I'm creating more of a pinch point on top. I'm not worried about the bottom, I'm worried about the top. The machine does not want to go this way because it's offset to the left. It's not natural for that machine to go that way to make sure we get a compacted curve. Okay, so again, I just move my body, make sure I get compaction down the left-hand side, and depending on how your mix is, okay, you can usually get that to, really tighten up on the backside. If the outside curve is really tight, like they really want to turn this in, first of all, if they're trying to mow that, it's going to be difficult, so I try to tell them, not go so tight. But if you do, it's obviously a lot harder to get that compact on the backside. And so you might have to do a little bit more finishing, a little bit more troweling to make sure that that's compact. Usually on tight outside curves like this, I'm going to take my joints and I'm going to go ahead and tighten up those joints to relieve any pressure that's in there where I might get a crack, down the road. So joints aren't always the same distance apart on all property. Tree rings, bring them closer together. Tight corners, down inclines where you're having problems getting compression on the machine, tighten them up. Make sure that you relieve that stress. But if you watch any of the videos of us on a job site and we're doing curves like this, my body position is always changing to make sure that I got 2 points of pressure, to make sure I'm directing pressure in the right spaces, in the right place to get those to tighten up. I still want my right hand open if I can. If you're on flat ground, you don't need to do much adjusting. These are my 2 points of pressure. So after a while, it gets to be second nature. You don't even have to think about it. And it kind of just comes to you and just, the machine just kind of drives itself and you don't even have to think. Let's talk about another thing here. The easiest way for me to explain this is I always refer to a truck, a trailer, and a hitch, okay? Um, Obviously the curb machine is going to go backwards, so I would consider myself the truck. The trailer is going to be the front of the machine, basically where the tires of the trailer are, the front of the machine. That's where the curb is coming out. And the hitch is going to be the skid, okay, which is right in the middle of the machine. Now, all of you that have pulled any type of trailer, boat or whatever, you know, when you're going around a curve, or let's say going around a corner, and you're pulling that boat, obviously your truck needs to be farther outside the curb, you know, around that corner, so the tires of your trailer don't run over the sidewalk, if that makes sense, or the actual parking lot curb. So you need to make sure that your truck is wide enough coming around that corner, so the curb is essentially on the line still. All right, now the tighter the curve, like around a tree ring, the farther out your tire has to be, or your truck, to make sure that your trailer stays on the line. Okay, if that makes sense. Now the opposite way here, and this is another reason for, you know, trying not to do a lot of tight curves, especially outside curve like this. Now, what the issue is with some people, they want their curb to go in the same place that they had their existing edging in, and so you're going to try to put it on that line. You remove the existing edging, you try to put it on there. Well, this is all still filled with rock. So to go around a curve like this, truck, trailer, hitch, you can only ride your truck so close to the actual curb, you know, the parking lot curb, but your trailer's farther outside that. So you can take this as close as you want, but your curb is in here. So essentially, to get that on the line, now you got to get your truck and your trailer, or your truck has got to be up in the rocks, and you're going over, you know, close to plants and things like that, so your curb stays on that line. Okay, you know, it's kind of very simple when you think about it after a while on where these tires need to be to make sure where that curb comes out. Now, talking about a hitch, all right, it's the same you know, kind of thing. If you're driving a truck and a trailer and you know, come out of a parking lot and you go down into the road, your truck goes down, well, what happens to your hitch? Your hitch sometimes drags on the ground and scrapes until you start coming up the other side. All right, this is no different. So if your tires, let's say you're going over a little bit of a crest and your tires are going down the crest, your hitch is eventually going to scrape against that crest, and if it scrapes too hard, it stops the machine, but your curb is still coming out. So as these go over the crest and start to lower, you need to start raising this to make sure that your hitch doesn't scrape along the ground. And vice versa, if you're start to go up a hill, your truck is now climbing, so your hitch is actually raising off the ground. If it raises off the ground, now you're spilling a whole bunch of excess out, so you can lower your tires as you go up, and then once you get to a certain point, raise them back up again, so you have a nice smooth transition. And those are just things that you kind of learn as you get more experience behind a curb machine. It's not something, I mean, we can show you, but until you experience it and you're behind it, then you kind of realize, you know, what it feels like, and the machine is going to tell you what's going on. Okay, outside curves like this, difficult. Try to get them to soften that up to make it smoother. Don't tell them that it's hard to run the machine. Tell them it's going to be easier for them to mow, and you know, don't put it on you being inexperienced. You put it on them, making it easier for them. So outside curves, you know, soften them up. Inside curves, not as hard, because that's the pinch point on the backside, so it makes it a little bit better. But truck, trailer, hitch, and kind of think about it, and you can kind of figure out where your tires need to be. This tire, a lot of people think that this tire, if you line it up, you can run that tire on your paint line and it will work. If I run the tire on the paint line going around an inside curve, my actual curb is inside the line. If I do it the opposite way, okay, my curb is outside the line. So you can't use the wheel as a judge for where to put that line, okay? The curb comes out the front of the machine, not the back, okay? So just realize that. Another thing I want to explain too is you're going to have those customers, you know, and myself with Valley Borders, okay, it's my curbing company, with residential customers that have existing lawns and existing properties. And a lot of you guys, that's mainly the work that you're going to do, okay? For us, we do a lot of landscape work, so it's brand new construction, new dirt, and so on. We don't deal with sprinklers. All of our landscapers are told, curbing goes in before the sprinklers. Okay, we need to make everything flow, and then they come in and put the sprinklers in after. We do not want the sprinklers dictating where the curb is. Okay, now on a residential property where it's existing already and they got sprinklers in, they got their black edging, all that kind of stuff. Now it's totally up to you on how you want to run your business. For myself and for what we do, okay, we don't mess with sprinklers. We don't remove any of their existing edging. Okay, it's more landscaper stuff. We are curbing guys. Okay, since it's done in the opposite way, sprinklers are in, their edging is in, and so on. We cannot get that curb to go in back of the sprinklers now where the existing edging is, because they got rock, they got plants, they got all this other stuff. And to run this machine, again, truck and trailer, when you're going around these curves and you got plants in the way and you got boulders in the way, you cannot get that curb to go in back of that sprinkler head and still maintain a nice, beautiful flowing line. So what we do and what we tell all our residential customers is 90% of the time, depending on where those sprinklers are at, we are going to create a brand new line on the outside of those sprinkler heads and make the curbing flow, and we will not have the sprinklers dictate where the curb goes. If you want to move your sprinkler heads after and dig underneath and put your sprinkler heads on the outside of the curb, that's totally up to you. Essentially, you don't have to, because all those sprinkler heads around here, especially with the big tall ones, will shoot over the curb. They're just going to be in the mulch or in the rock, and they don't have to touch them, they don't have to move them. But now they got a nice, smooth flowing line that is dictated by the operator and by the company that's putting the curb in, and not dictated by the existing sprinklers that are already there. Okay, if we do that, people are going to drive by, and other companies are going to drive by and look at it and say, well, the guy who was running that machine doesn't know how to run a machine because it's just a mess. We were running the machine based on what the sprinklers were telling us to do and trying to get in back of those sprinklers because that's what the homeowner wanted. We don't do that. So if the homeowner is adamant about putting the curb in back of the sprinkler heads, we just don't do it unless they actually move the sprinkler heads forward before we get there. That's not what we do, because we want the curb to be, to flow nice and to look the way it's supposed to look. And essentially we're having another company, a landscape company that put the sprinklers in, or a company that put the existing edging in, dictate where our curb goes. And that's not what we're gonna do. That's totally up to you though. You can charge extra for removing sprinkler heads and moving them and things like that. That's how you wanna base your curbing business. That's totally up to you. But for us, we don't do that. And for all our landscapers that we do curb for, if they put the sprinklers in before we get there, which happens sometimes depending on weather and stuff, sometimes we go outside those sprinkler heads. We just tell them we're going to make that flow, and if that head is in the way, we're going to make it flow around that head, and then you're going to have to move it after the fact because you're dictating what we have to do now, and that's not the way we want to do that. All right, guys, that's pretty much what we want to do on this video. I know it got a little bit longer than I wanted, but hopefully that helps some of you, you guys out there that are just beginning or looking at getting into business. If you have any questions or comments, you can obviously put it on the put it on this video. Again, for those of you that have been curbing for a long time and you watch this video and you may curb a different way or do it a different style and things like that, this video is not intended for you. This is something for newer guys that are looking for different tips and some help that way. So if you got comments that you want to put down there that might not be the comments that I want to hear, just keep it to yourself. Everybody does it the way that they want to do it. This is what's been successful for me. It's easy for me to teach, especially new guys, and we'll just go from there. We're going to move on to the next video now in the series, and it's going to be how to do all your daily maintenance and cleaning and everything that you need to do to actually run this machine every day to make sure that it's going to be in tip-top shape and running good for you.